Hello, it is just after midnight on Saturday, or no, on Monday, September 21st, and the Buzzwordathon has just started. For those of you who don't know what the Buzzwordathon is, it is a readathon hosted by Kayla at Books and Lala. And basically the point of it is you spend a week reading as many books with a specific buzzword in the title. This particular Buzzwordathon, the buzzword is night, so N-I-G-H-T. You could also use night as in like K-N-I-G-H-T because it still has the N-I-G-H-T in the title. So I have 0 books on my physical TBR that have the word night in it. Technically I have 1, but it's like the 3rd book in a series and I've never even heard of the first 2. So that one's out. That's actually going off of my physical TBR. I will be donating it. Beside the point here is I have no books on my physical TBR. And I don't want to buy books for this. So what I am going to do is read arcs. And I have one NetGalley arc called Coffee Days, Whiskey Nights, which is a book of poetry, which is going to be my first book that I'm going to read. And then after that, I am moving to a different, slightly unknown arc webpage, which is called, I don't remember. It is called Book Sirens. Let's get back to the better light now. So Book Sirens is, I want to say a newer, it's not really new, it's been around for at least a year now, if not longer, but it's not very popular and most of the authors on Book Sirens are like fairly unknown authors. So I want to kind of take this week to read basically unknown authors and then like give them reviews, because every book that there are like tons of books that have the word night in it, but none of them really have any reviews on Goodreads. So that's the goal with this. The thing that's different about Book Sirens than like NetGalley is you are pre-approved for arcs. So I don't request any arcs. Any arc that I can see on the website, I've already been approved for. So, and it's based off of your like social media following and then like how frequently you rate books. So maybe they do have some popular authors on Book Sirens and I just don't have the standing because I have a huge social media following. I just haven't ever used the site to review books. So we're gonna kind of like experience the site for the first time this week and review a bunch of unknown authors. So that's the plan. I'm going to start with, I'm gonna put the cover up here, Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights, and I will check back in with you when I am done with that book and then tell you what I'm reading next. Hello again. It's been maybe 30 minutes and I know I'm wearing a different shirt, but only because the shirt that I was wearing was like crazy thick material and it was super hot. So I decided to change shirts and read that very, very, very exceedingly short book of poetry that was Coffee Days and Whiskey Nights. I didn't realize that it was that short, but it took me like less than 30 minutes to read. While short, it was kind of inspiring, actually. It's written in a way that doesn't really read like poetry. It reads more like prose, but kind of like stream of consciousness prose from a perspective of somebody who is struggling with anxiety and depression. But it's strangely like it's strangely uplifting and motivating in a way where it allows the reader to be like, yes, you're suffering now, but things get better. Things will get better. You can work through these things. And it was good. It did open, let me see, it did open with like a list of trigger warnings, so if that's something that you need, it's literally right on the first page. The formatting was awful, but I think that's just because it was an arc. I know a lot of the NetGalley arcs that I get just have like such atrocious formatting, and it's sad because it kind of like ruins the overall book. And the only other thing is it had to have been an artistic decision, but there's no capital letters, including like the word I was all lowercase, and that throws me off. But it obviously seemed to be like a active decision to not do that. Overall, I enjoyed it, and I don't particularly enjoy poetry. So if you like poetry, then I would say definitely go for this one. Good book, good book. Next up, though, I am moving to my Book Sirens books, and Book Sirens does a very interesting thing with... I'm going to actually move here so I can see my PC screen. My computer is in my kitchen, which is why you see kitchen stuff behind me, but I'm looking at my computer. So the book that I'm reading from Book Sirens is called The Night and the Land by Matt Spencer. What Book Sirens does is it gives you like a blurb or synopsis of the book. It gives you a blurb synopsis of the author. And then it'll tell you things like what genres this falls under. So this particular book has horror, urban fantasy, dark fantasy, sword and sorcery, grimdark fantasy, and novels. It only has 25 ratings on Goodreads, and Goodreads just says it's urban fantasy. So there's that. The other thing, or the next thing that that Book Sirens does that I think is absolutely amazing is it gives you trigger warnings. So if there's any trigger warnings in this book, it lists it before you even request or download. You don't really have to request, but it gives you all the trigger warnings before you even download the book. So the trigger warnings for this, there's quite a bit of them. It seems like it's going to be a very sexually violent book, which is fine for me, but may not be fine for everybody. If it's in the series, it tells you what series, like where it is in the series. This is the first in a series, and it is a series. It'll tell you if it's a standalone too. And then the other thing that I thought was really awesome that this site does is it tells you the type of ending, but you have to like click on a spoiler button to say like I want to see what type of ending this is. So if you're somebody like me who I know I don't like happy endings, so this gave me like the trigger warnings for all of these like sexual violence things, and then told me it had a happy ending, I'd be like, okay, that's probably not a book for me. This one, I'm not going to tell you what kind of ending it is, but it definitely does not have a happy ending, or I wouldn't have picked it. But I think that's really awesome. And I like that it's behind a spoiler tag, so if you don't like to know those things, then you don't have to know it. But for me, like, knowing that this isn't a happy ending is not going to ruin the book for me. Like, there's so many different types of sad endings that it's just like, that didn't ruin anything for me. And it doesn't say sad ending, so I'm not giving away the ending. I just use that as an example. It gives you like publication date, blah blah blah, and then This was published on May 13th, 2019, so it's already out. So if I like it, I can share it with you. You can go grab it. And then it gives you page links. So this is 362 pages. So a 362-page urban fantasy I should be able to finish fairly quickly. I will have it done by tomorrow. There's no way I'm going to have it done today because it's almost 1 a.m. already. But I am going to start reading this now. And I will check back in. Hello. I obviously just got out of the shower. My hair's drying in a towel, and I am 30% into The Night and the Land, and I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit because it's not off to a great start. Like, we're struggling a little bit here. First off, how do I go about this? The prologue did not handle racism well. Like, not even minorly well. The author or the writing is obviously well, I don't want to say obviously. It seems like the author is trying to approach racism from a open-minded standpoint, but it comes across as the author is obviously a white man who thinks that he already knows everything there is to know about racism and prejudice, and that his preconceived notions about prejudice are fine to put into this book without actually researching or having any sort of sensitivity writers. And that's problematic if you didn't guess that. I honestly probably would have DNF'd this book in the prologue if it weren't for the fact that this is the very first book I have requested off of this website, and I don't want to start with a DNF. So that's the only reason this author got a second chance, and it's probably just going to end up that he's going to get a very poor review because I'm continuing this book with not high hopes. Even though I have to say, after all of the main characters were established as Caucasian, there's no more racism because the author stopped describing people. Two things that stood out as far as like the racism goes is in the prologue there was a line that literally said, "Daddy's not prejudiced, but," and that's two-part problematic. First, if you ever say somebody is not prejudiced, that's just not true. Everybody has some sort of prejudice. Only people who are uneducated and ignorant about human nature and their own flaws are going to say that they're not prejudiced. Everybody has some prejudice in them. Your job as a decent human being is to educate yourself and try to overcome your prejudices. You can't be not prejudiced in 2020. It's just not possible. The second part is that sentence has never been followed by anything other than an excuse for racism. But is the key word right there, where he's not prejudiced, but followed by a this is why he comes across as prejudiced or racist. And they're always racist. That was basically, like, the actual sentence was, Daddy's not prejudiced, but, what is it? But most of his farm buddies were, which it excuses, it's like, well, maybe my dad isn't openly racist and hateful towards people of color that he meets, but he lets his friends get away with it without saying anything. That's all that says. The other problem that I have with the book is the author keeps referring to Native Americans as Indians instead of Native Americans, and I don't understand why. There's no specific time frame to like the when this book happens. If it was like, it could be set in the 80s and it could be set in 2020. The main characters all seem to be like homeless teenagers, so there's no technology to give things a time frame. And because of that, it's not to say that it's not set in like the 80s or 90s when the term Indian would have been more commonplace, but without distinctly setting up a time frame, you need to use a proper term. Like, Native Americans are not from India. Don't use an outdated term calling them Indians, whether it's offensive or not. It's just an outdated term. Like, it's silly. And it stands out, and it takes away from the plot of the story. Speaking of the plot of the story, I don't really know what's going on. To be fair, I'm not that far in. It's not dystopian like I thought it was. The main characters seem to be two species of either aliens or like beings from another dimension. Like, I can't really, it doesn't explain any of the background. You just know that they look human, but they are not human. They are a completely different species. And it's like a Romeo-Juliet type story where the two teenage main characters are of two warring species of aliens, and they fall in love. And the girl is trying to escape her family, who is hunting her down, and she knows that he is of this warring species, and he does not know what he is. He thinks he's human. I also don't know what either one of them are. Like, I'm so fucking confused about that, but I'm glad that it's not just info dumping me all of the information on these species, and I'm sure by the end of the book I'll be able to figure it out. If not, then the rating goes down. It was also extremely insta-love. Like, they instantly fell in love with each other and dedicated their entire heart and souls and lives and beings to each other within minutes of meeting. It was like, I like, she talks and talks and talks about like not wanting to like have sex with people because it makes her uncomfortable, because she knows she's going to run and she doesn't like forming relationships, and she ends up having sex with him like the day she meets him. And it was just like, wait, what happened to this? I don't want to be this girl. But yeah, so it's got a little bit of smut, but like the insta-lovey thing, the racism, and like just how boring and generic the characters are so far is not thrilling me. But maybe it improves. I'll get back to you later with any updates and see if this gets any better or if it just remains something mediocre that could have used sensitivity readers. Alright, I finished The Night in the Land by Matt Spencer, and it did get a little bit better, I guess. I didn't have much of a problem with racism towards the later part of the book. There was some questionable content around Native Americans, but I'm not entirely sure if I was just misunderstanding the phrasing used or if it was actually supposed to imply that like something about Native Americans. Like, I'm not comfortable enough, or I'm not Native American at all, so I can't really speak to that. As far as like the overall plot goes, I did figure out like the whole, is it aliens or like another dimension, and it's definitely more like other dimension. Like, the characters are very similar to like typical fae, except for they're not using like the fae names, but it's like another race that has come from an alternate dimension and lives among humans, disguising themselves among humans, but separate, and thinks that they're better and more like godlike. That kind of makes sense. Overall, it wasn't like that well written. The character motivations like didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like why the main character, or like why the characters do what they do without spoiling anything. There's some like stupid obvious tropes in there, like the chosen one trope and the insta love trope that they're overdone, and it wasn't done in a particularly good way in this book. It was very tropey done in something you've read 80 trillion times. And there's like a character in there that has some very coarse language. It didn't really bother me. Like, I didn't have a problem reading it, but I could see why people would have a problem reading that, because it was some like extremely coarse, guttural language. There were good things about the book. Like, he did create his own universe type, like the characters, while they reflected very fae-like creatures, they did have their own names, they had their own like background. It wasn't like the best, most fleshed out fantasy background, and then it did take place in modern day US, so there wasn't any like extreme world building or anything like that, but it wasn't like awful. Overall, I think that this book was very mediocre, bordering on offensive with like the racism problems early in the book. Not the worst thing I've read, but not something that I'd really recommend to anybody, and I have absolutely no plans to finish out the series. That's that book. I'm going to move locations, and then we'll talk about the next book that I'm reading. Hello. So, back in the kitchen, and the next arc that I am going to read is a horror story called Nightmare by Chad Nicholas. And from the blurb, it seems something like what is that story called? Pet Sematary, where it's like, had it come back, no it couldn't have, he'd buried it for good. And that gives me some Pet Sematary vibes. So I'm thinking Pet Sematary, there's dead bodies, there's hauntings, like, I don't really know what's going on, but shit sounds creepy. So, that is what I am reading. This is not published yet. This comes out October 6th. So, if I like it, then hey, we're gonna hit it right in time for Halloween month. And if I don't like it, well, then I don't like it. But yeah, horror story next. And I will check in once I get a reasonable way through this book and I have something to tell you about. Hello. What is my hair doing? Oh. It is Tuesday morning, and I am just over 50% of my way through Nightmare, and holy shit, this is a trip so far. Basically, the main character, his name is Scott, and he is an adult with, you know, like the perfect family, a loving wife, 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys, and blah blah blah. Nice job, you know. But as a child, Scott suffered from like some pretty bad shit. Like he was kidnapped as a child and tortured, and he's got obviously some extreme PTSD from that, and it seems like in the course of his childhood trauma he developed dissociative identity disorder, where he like basically became another person. Like his brain divided his personality. Now, is this like good rep or anything like that as far as like what dissociative identity disorder is? I can't tell you. I don't know anything about the disorder. I have a feeling because it's a horror book, it's probably not accurate or decent mental health representation. But I literally don't know anything about this disorder, so I can't speak to it. So, but yeah, this book's from Scott's perspective, and you've got kind of like the unreliable narrator trope is like weird shit is going on every single day, and like it's just creepy. You're from the perspective of the unreliable narrator, and you get all of the like weird little changes and missing time and everything like that. You don't really know what's going on. And that's what it basically set up to be, which was pretty cool. Until about halfway through the book. I literally just hit the 50% mark and shit hit the fan. And this is not at all what I was thinking was going to happen. And it got crazy, and I can't tell you because just spoilers. And I'm very, very much enjoying what I've read so far. It's a pretty quick read. According to my Kindle, I have about an hour left. So I am going to quickly finish this out and figure out like what in the actual shit is going on with this book. And I will check back in with you when I am done. Alright, so I finished Nightmare, and holy crap, that was like a trip of a book. Quite potentially the worst parenting I have ever experienced in written language. But, like, I was so confused the whole time reading it, and it wrapped up very nicely in the end, and it was creepy, and I think it's like accomplished exactly what it set out to do as a horror novel. Like I totally believe like all of that was accomplished. But holy shit, that was so fucked up. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't even know that I would recommend it to other people. But it screwed with my head, which is exactly, or which I think is exactly what it was trying to do, is screw with the reader's head. So it accomplished all of that, all of the screwing with the heads, done, accomplished, good. So I am going to move on to the next book, and I will check back in with you in just a second once I move location again and figure out what I am reading next. Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. So the next book up is called Midnight Wings by Ariel Sealink. And this one is a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella set in outer space. And from the looks of the cover, this is a POC Cinderella. So, very excited already. Basically, the main character, Elle, wants to be a fighter pilot, but her stepmom basically keeps her as a slave in the household. It apparently is a romance, but it doesn't seem like just a typical Cinderella story. So I like retellings. I think most of the books with night that I'm finding in them are horror, so I'm kind of glad this isn't a horror book. And yeah, Cinderella sci-fi, like, sounds super fun. It also is very short from the looks of this. It's only 127 pages, so it looks like a novella. I'll check back in when I'm about halfway done with it. So, Midnight Wings. It's, like I said earlier, a Cinderella story where the main character wants to be a fighter pilot, but she's kind of like enslaved by her stepmother because the spaceship society that they live, or like that this world exists in, has a very small like space because the spaceship, there's a limited amount of space. So in order to like move out of your family's homes, you have to have like a sort of status. If you think of the Black Mirror movie, or not movie, the Black Mirror episode where you have like a social ranking, like that exists in this story, and her stepsisters and their friends like bombed her social ranking to like fuck up everything, right? So she like wants to be a fighter pilot. There is a contest for everybody, no matter what your social ranking, to apply to become a fighter pilot, because there is a lack of fighter pilots in the Queen's army. And it hasn't happened yet, but she's already met the prince at the, just like in passing, and he knows who she is, she knows who he is, but she's kind of like embarrassed about her social status, and so avoids him and thinks that there's obviously never a chance, which of course there's going to be a chance. It's Cinderella, she's going to end up with the prince, we all know these things. So far it's good enough that I got to like 60% in the book without even realizing that I had hit 60%. It was just like, oh wait, I only have like 40% of the book left and I didn't even realize. So it's very immersive. I think it's a very good retelling of Cinderella so far. I don't have anything problematic with it, which is good considering that I found problematic things with the last two books that I read. So far so good. I will check back in with you once I finish this book. Alright, I am done with Midnight Wings, and that was a really cute little Cinderella retelling. In this case, Cinderella had a lot more agency than she did in the original story. She wasn't fighting to, you know, marry the prince and fall in love and everything. She was fighting to get a job, and against some pretty shitty odds. There was no magic for like a fairy godmother. It was more of like her friends like realizing her situation and deciding to help her. But most of it was her own skill and like confidence in herself, which had its moments, winning the day. And letting her live her happily ever after. No problematic content, which was good because everything else I've read has problematic content, but I really, really enjoyed that. So I just don't have as much to talk about because it wasn't like, it wasn't so great that I can't like stop gushing about it, but it wasn't like awful. Easily a 4-star. I definitely will check out the other books in the series. If you like Cinderella retellings or fairy tale retellings, then this is a very good one. And that's pretty much it for that book.
Hello, I am back. So, I can't really find anything that just sounds like I'm super excited to read. I did find, like, let's see, 7 books that have the word night in it that I have been pre-approved for. I think this is what I'm going to go for. It looks like a light fantasy, and it's about a 14-year-old girl who is being raised to be a lady. Her father is a knight, so I'm assuming this is set in some fantasy equivalent of the 15th century, 14th, 15th century, when knights were things. But she has to become a knight and protect her father, or rescue her father, instead of a man rescuing her, which sounds up my alley. I think this is pretty short. It's about 300 pages. It's not super short, but it's not super long. But like medieval fantasy, I could do this. I could do this. Let's do this one. This is called The Knight's Daughter. So instead of N-I-G-H-T, we get K-N-I-G-H-T. I will check back in with you once I get a little bit into this book and I figure out what it's about. Hello, I am here for my check-in for, what is this called? The Knight's Daughter. And it's just super generic. Like, it's not bad by any means, but it's not doing anything new with like fantasy. It's really just a generic knights and fairies story with a young female protagonist whose heart is in the right place, but she's really fucking useless. I don't have anything bad to say about the book, but like I said, there's nothing special about it. It's like stupid generic. I'm not disliking it. I enjoyed it well enough. I just don't think it does anything worth recommending it over every other generic medieval white fairy tale out there. But yeah, I'm going to finish reading. I'm almost at like 70%. Like I said, I suck at checking in, but I'm almost at 70%. I'm gonna finish reading this and then I will let you know if it does anything not generic. Alright, I finished The Knight's Daughter, and honestly it was a really super generic plug-and-play fantasy story. Like, if you think about medieval fantasy where you have something bad happens, a character has to go on a journey, and they're a chosen one who has to fight a dark one. Like, it's exactly just plug in this character in a slightly different story, and it's the exact same thing. Even from, like, going place to place and meeting different races of fantasy characters. Is this a bad story? No. There was nothing like
problematic, wrong, or anything with this. I think the problem with it is this is a young adult story that is like actually meant for young, like this verges into middle grade and not necessarily just young adult. The main character's 14, so I would give this book to a young girl who wants to see herself in a story like Lord of the Rings. Because it had a female protagonist. She wasn't like super powerful. She had powerful friends, which the more I describe this, the more it sounds like Lord of the Rings, except for, I mean, it's not the story of Lord of the Rings, it's just the outline of the story is exactly like exactly the same. So it's just too young for me to appreciate this story. It's just not a bad story. So 3 stars, and we're moving right along to the next one. What I am going to read is something that I got approved on from NetGalley. So we're moving off of Book Sirens and going to NetGalley. And I think I'm going to do a NetGalley book and then an Elderweiss book. And the NetGalley book that I got approved for, actually I don't even think I needed to get approved for. I think this was just available to download. But it's called Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, 100 Immigrant Women Who Changed the World. And this is like children's / middle grade, where it is little short children's stories about women who had to immigrate from their country for various reasons. Whether they chose to leave their country or they were forced out of their country, and it's just famous women who were immigrants, which I definitely think is something that we in America need to read right now, because we don't treat immigrants very well and we don't treat women very well, and my guess is most of these immigrant women are going to be women of color who we really don't treat very well right now. So I think this is going to be a great children's book, and it seems like a fun, intelligent read. So I'm gonna read this, and I will check back in with you once I get a good way into this book. Hello. I am just at 50% in, what is this called again? Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. This is the newest one about immigrants. This is like the 3rd in the line of Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. And it is 100 stories about women who immigrated from one country to another. There's no specific countries. It's just they all have to have immigrated from one country to another for various reasons. And this is a children's picture book. So this is like targeted towards children, not adults. What I can say is I do have an advanced reader copy of this book, and there are no illustrations. The formatting is just straight up atrocious, but you get the idea of what the stories in this book are going to be even without the illustrations. So for something like this, the advanced reader copy is not for children, because a child would not make any sense of this, but an adult can read this and determine if this is good for children. And in my opinion, I would say yes. Like, yes, a million times yes. This is the type of book that a young girl can read and find a role model in. So far, so good. And I will check back in once I'm completely done with this book. So I just finished Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, 3 or 100 stories of immigrant women. I don't know. It's a long title. Anyway, this was an adorable but powerful story of great female role models for young girls. This is for children. Like, this isn't something that as an adult you should go in and think that you're going to learn so much about these women in different things like that. Like, it's like maybe a paragraph, like 5-10 sentences about a woman. It doesn't really give any details of her life. It's just like a brief overview. And if you have a young daughter, niece, whatever, I think this is a very good book for you to grab and let her have some female role models. Like, shit, boys could read this too. There's nothing in there that says boys can't read it. It's just all about women. So I think it was designed for young girls. I personally think that I will grab copies of the first 2 editions for my nieces for Christmas. Neither one of my nieces are immigrants, so I don't think this particular one would be targeted towards them, but 200 stories of just women being women and showing young girls that you could do whatever the fuck you want to do. And no one can stop you. I think this is great. Definitely high marks. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it outside of that. And let's move on to the next book. Hello, we are back with another book that I need to read. And so far I have read across like a lot of genres. I've read 6 books total. 3 of them are adult, 2 are YA, and 1 is children's. Then as far as genre goes, I've got 2 fantasy, a sci-fi book, a horror book, a poetry book, and then the children's books was children's nonfiction. And I think I want an adult nonfiction in here, just to like spice things up. Honestly, most of the books that I've seen that have night in the title are either fantasy or horror. So dropping, or sci-fi. So I think dropping in another nonfiction right now is my plan, or is the best plan. And then we can go back to the fantasy, sci-fi, horror genre stuff. I am going to go to a new ARC website for this. This one we're pulling off of Edelweiss, which I hate this website as far as like how everything loads and how you give feedback and stuff like that. Like, it's atrocious. My phone keeps going off. I'm sure you can hear it. My friend Trey is sending me Snapchats. I can see it from here. Anyway, even though I hate Edelweiss, there are about 10 ARCs that are ready for immediate download that have night in the title. The first one I want to read is called Dark Days, Bright Nights, and it is nonfiction about homelessness in Las Vegas, which is either going to be real interesting or real boring. But we're going to go with this one because I can just, like I said, I can directly download it. I don't have to request or get approval or anything like that. And that's what we're reading next. I am going to go attempt again to dye my hair. So it's going to be a different color when you see me again. Normal stuff. Hello, I am back. I have different colored hair. It is very yellow. That will be fixed eventually. For right now, it's fine. I am a little over halfway in Dark Days, Bright Nights, which is the nonfiction story of homeless people in Las Vegas, specifically the drainage tunnels under Las Vegas, which is kind of cool. Las Vegas basically criminalizes homelessness because of the tourist, like everything. I don't know how to say that better. But this is a really interesting story where it's just basically done in a way where a reporter went into the tunnels of Las Vegas and basically interviewed a bunch of homeless people and asked them like a set of questions about basically like their earliest memory, how they ended up being homeless, just kind of their life story. And he was kind of looking to see if there's any trends to what causes homelessness. But everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own reasons for being homeless. Everybody has their own experience for being homeless, even if there are trends to that homelessness. And the trends seem to be that the US government sucks, which no one's really surprised by. Most of these people have been failed by the system. You've got homeless vets, you've got people who got robbed and they're stranded because none of their friends or family will like respond to them. They showed up to Vegas to have a good time, got robbed, and then were stuck and had no way to get home because they have no money. You have a lot of drug use, some sex work, and it's all over the place. Some people seem to have pretty good lives. Some people seem to have really, really shitty lives. But so far, it's interesting. It's slow paced for me. I always read nonfiction a lot slower than I read fiction, but it is interesting, and I definitely should be able to finish it tonight. Hello! So I have finished Dark Days, Bright Nights, and it was pretty good. Like, the stories were interesting. I felt like I learned a lot about homelessness that I wasn't aware of. I did understand that most people who are homeless either have an addiction problem or mental health issues and or like a record or a combination of all of those things. Like, those are all things that I was aware of. But what I did find out from this book was that most of these people, their addiction or mental health issues stemmed from childhood trauma. So I did learn that, which is interesting. There's a lot of problems with US society and homelessness and how we treat homelessness as a crime instead of helping these people like deal with their addiction and mental health. That's shitty. It gives me a new view of like how to treat homeless people if I come across them. I honestly will admit that I tend to just ignore them, but I feel like it's more appropriate to try to like offer them some water or food. I don't know that I would give anybody homeless money still because I don't want to support their drug habit, provided they have one, and statistically most of them probably have a drug habit. Out of the 35 people interviewed for this book, 34 of them had an addiction. The one guy who was not addicted to drugs, alcohol, or gambling, or all three, was a convicted sex offender. So the book itself was fairly decently written. My only real issue with it isn't really an issue, but all of these people are describing their lives and they're just so like nonchalant about like horrible things, and it was so emotionless. Like women would be like gang raped just trying to find a place to sleep, and the way they talked about it, they were like, yeah, it happens, oh well, I'll move on, it was my fault. And it, like, that was hard to read because it was just like, and that was just hard to read. So I also feel like a lot of people would read this book and who aren't very compassionate people, and just see that the interviewed, or the people interviewed, were so nonchalant about all these horrible things happening to them, and that people will read the book and be like, yeah, well, they didn't care about it, why should I care about it? And that sucks a lot. I also don't see what I could do about it. So there's that. So moving on with some like housekeeping items as far as the readathon goes. The readathon officially ends on Saturday, but at midnight, but I need to get this video up by Saturday at 3 p.m. So I am going to have the readathon in for me on Friday instead of Saturday, and then that gives me a couple of days to finish off the handful of books that were still on my September TBR. But I'm going to go out with a bang for the last bit of, or the last like day of reading, and I will be back in just a minute with what we're doing for that. Okay, I'm back, and I know normally I'm at my PC for this particular part of my check-in where I tell you about what I'm reading next, but I got physical books this time. And I know I said at the beginning of this video that I don't have any physical books with night in the title, and that remains true, but I do have an entire series with night in the series that I wanted to reread before I decide to get rid of the books, because I don't think these books are worth keeping, but I don't just want to get rid of them. And that series is the House of Night series. I'm gonna try to read all 12 books in this series in the next 24 hours. Hello, editing me here. I realized that this video is like stupid crazy long, so I'm gonna break it into 2 parts. And we are going to come back for the 24-hour book reading thing in the next video. So it's going to end here. If you have been watching this, thank you so much. I would really appreciate a like and subscribe, because I'm trying to hit 100 subscribers, so it would be really nice if you've been watching some of my videos, if you would subscribe. And I will catch you in part 2.